Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show. First of all, I'd like to say a big welcome to new listeners. I know it's that time of year where lots of people are starting a new sociology course at all different levels, all around the world. So if you are joining us, you're new to the show, welcome. Thank you very much for listening. And on that note, I've got a request to start with. If you have something you'd like to say, if you'd like to get your own podcast episode out, then I am looking for students to send me work on a range of different sociology topics, and I will put it out for you as a podcast. So if there's just something you'd like to talk about that you're particularly passionate about, just record yourselves, make it into an MP3. Even if you just record it on your smartphone, it comes out really good quality. So if there's just something you want to get off your chest, a discussion point that you want to talk about, then please do so. If you want to be a bit more adventurous, you want to talk through an essay or an aspect of sociology that you really enjoy, whatever it might be, anything that you'd like to do, then please do send to me. It doesn't have to be alone. If you want to do a bit of a group work, if you want to have a discussion, you and some friends, something within sociology, then please do send it on to me and I will do my very best to send out the episodes. So if you have got something you'd like to contribute, then please do email the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com. The Sociology Show podcast is also offering tuition as well. So if you're struggling on something or you just like some extra help on any different area, any different level of sociology, then we can help. If you are in the south coast of England, if you're in the Sussex area, then we can do some face-to-face tuition. But otherwise, we do online tuition. And that can either, again, be individual, or if you want to team up, there's a few of you that want to do joint sessions together over Zoom or over a different platform, then we can offer private tuition as well. If that is something that you're interested in, then please do email me and we can talk through different options, different plans of how you could do some private tuition. So again, the same email address, that's the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com. And so on to this episode, and I was delighted to interview Manuela Mendoza and Professor Carol Vincent talking about education and inequality in Chile. Really interesting episode. So without further ado, let's go over to the interview. Hi, thank you very much for coming on to the Sociology Show podcast. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do, please?
Hi, Matthew. Thank you very much for having us. So my name is Manuela Mendoza. I am currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Educational Sciences at the University of O'Higgins in Chile. And I am a sociologist of education. I did my PhD in UCL, the Institute of Education. And my research has focused on the relationship between market-based educational policies and processes of identity construction in schools. I've paid special attention to issues such as school choice, social diversity and mix in schools, processes of inclusion and exclusion in schools.
Thank you very much. And you're joined by Carol today as well. Carol, would you like to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. My name is Carol Vincent. I'm the Professor of Sociology of Education at UCL-Institute of Education in London. I teach contemporary education policy here and run a master's programme in education policy. And my research interests are quite varied, but I suppose my main interest is parents and how their relationships with educational institutions have been shaped by class and race. I've also looked at friendships and how people's friendships have been shaped by class and race, and various issues to do with contemporary education policy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I always start by asking people why the interest in that area. Education inequality, you know, it's huge, it's diverse. You just mentioned there's so much to unpack there, but why that area in particular?
That's a good question. Well, I started doing research on education when I was an anthropology student in Chile. I was very interested in Pierre Bourdieu's theory, and I think that his book, The Reproduction, was very appealing for me. So I started to do research on education, and then I got more involved in the field. But I think that my entry was very much about the theory and how education constitute a crucial area in society to shape people's opportunities and social inequalities.
Thank you. And for you, Carol?
Yes, I mean, sociology of education has always focused on inequalities in education, seeking to understand how those work through the education system and what it is that we can do about them. And so that has been affected my career and shaped my career all the way through, really. And as Manuela says, Bourdieu has also very much spoken to me. I have a particular interest in social class, but also in terms of social class, we have to look at how social class interacts with race, ethnicity, gender in particular, but other social dimensions as well.
It's really interesting because I often ask people who they were influenced by or who their favourite sociologist was, or, you know, what inspired them. I think Pierre Bourdieu is the most popular by quite a long way, by quite some distance. And even though his work is, you know, it's not contemporary, it's not fresh, it seems as relevant today as it ever was.
And I think one of the reasons actually that Bourdieu is so popular is that his work sets out a series of beginnings, a series of ways of thinking about inequality, and people have managed to work with that and develop it in various different ways. So there is a considerable space there for people to make their own contributions, and I think that's one of the reasons that he may be so very popular.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that classification as well, that when we look at inequalities, it's not just about material capital, but how important social capital and cultural capital come into those inequalities as well.
Absolutely.
So do you want to tell us a little bit more about your recent research to do with education and inequalities?
Yes, well, my most recent research was my PhD thesis, which, as I said, I did it at the Institute of Education, supervised by Carol Vincent. So it was about social mix and friendship relationships in schools with socioeconomic diversity in Chile, which is very, very exceptional. We have a very segregated educational system, so I was trying to look at these exceptions and see whether there were mixing relationships, what were the dispositions of parents and members of staff towards difference and towards mixing practices between students, how they conceive, for example, the possible benefits of these relationships, and so on. So yeah, I think that Pierre Bourdieu's theory was very useful for me, not only because of his own concepts, but also because of the developments that his theory has had, and particularly the concept of ethical dispositions, which is this idea that they are able to reflect about their own positions and about the social structure and develop particular attitudes towards others and potentially change their own attitudes and dispositions in consideration of these relationships. So yeah, that was very interesting, and it's shaping my current postdoctoral research, which is about conviviality dynamics in schools, and it's more about conducting an action research to try out some strategies to promote mixing dynamics in schools.
Thank you. For a little bit of context, what is the school system structure like in Chile? Particularly, I'm interested in the difference between sort of private and what we would call state or comprehensive education. I know in the UK, it's something like 92% go to comprehensive or state school and about 8% private. What's the structure like in Chile?
Yeah, well, we have a very privatized educational system. Most of the students go to private schools. We have a system divided in state schools, which receive about 45% of the students. Then we have private subsidized schools, which are privately administered, and they also receive some funding from the state. And these schools receive the majority of the students, so more than 50% of the students go there. And then we have private elite schools, which receive a minority of the students, but these people tend to have the higher positions in society. So yeah, it's very privatized, very segregated. Students who have a higher socioeconomic status tend to go to private schools, and those who have fewer resources go to state schools.
And is that reflective in the outcomes, the results as well?
Yes, definitely. Private schools tend to have better results in the CIMSE, which is the National Standardized Test. So yeah, it's one of the it actually has the third position among OECD countries, most segregated countries.
Wow. Based on what you've just said, I imagine there's very little mixing of the different social class groups because of that segregation through the system itself.
Exactly. Yeah. There's very little, but in 2015, a very important reform has been taking place, which is the inclusion law. It's a reform that attempts to decrease the segregation and promote social diversity within schools. So, for example, if it forbids completely selective admission processes in schools that receive public fundings, and it is expected that this law increases the levels of heterogeneity in schools, but we are still trying to figure out if this is working. Actually, that's one of the reasons why I conducted my study. I was trying to figure out whether, even in a potential scenario where the social diversity in schools was increased, what would happen? Does it mean that people are going to learn from each other, that there's going to be more mixing, that we are going to develop democratic attitudes, be more prone to redistribution, and so on?
Do you want to say a little bit more about that? What's your early research shown in relation to that?
Well, I did a qualitative case study in 2 schools, so my findings, of course, are not representative of the whole situation in Chile, but what I found shows some or warns about something that is very important, which is that even in schools that seem to be particularly open to diversity and to promote mixing, we can't take for granted that people are going to be open to mixing with each other, and the development of democratic learning is going to happen. So in my case studies, it was there was a tendency to promote mixing through assimilation of working class students. So it was more evident that those that could learn or have some benefits from social mixing were those in a lower socioeconomic position. It was less evident how people from socioeconomically advantaged backgrounds could benefit from interacting with their less advantaged peers. So I think that's something that's important, because even if producing social diversity and reducing segregation in schools is important, we can't just assume that interaction will happen and that the development of this citizenship and democratic attitudes will naturally develop.
That's interesting. So you might end up with subcultures within a culture, subcultures within a particular school.
Exactly. Yeah. Internal segregation. Well, that's something that the international literature has shown. We didn't have much evidence in Chile, but it's very aligned to what we already knew in other contexts.
And is there quite a, sorry, ignore my ignorance, is there quite a regional difference? Is that the majority of the wealth around Santiago, the capital, for example?
Yes, well, in Santiago, I did my study in Santiago, the capital city, but in different neighborhoods. So Santiago itself is a very segregated city. Towards the west of the city, for example, there's a higher concentration of wealthy people, whereas towards the east and the south of the city, there's the opposite. So I chose two case studies in these opposite places, even though both schools, for different reasons, they had a majority of middle-class students, a minority of working-class students. But there's a high association between the locality and social class, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that is a similar situation to in England. You know, the idea of the comprehensive system was that those schools should be the same, with the same amount of income, and teachers are paid the same. But actually, the regional differences mean that they are vastly different in terms of their outcomes, but also the type of students that attends the school as well.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for the Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Could I bring Carol in at this point? Carol, I just wondered, from what you've seen from Manuela's work, what's really sort of spiked an interest in you?
I think Manuela's work was extremely interesting because of the way that she picked up, in a very careful and nuanced way, the attitudes around social class, that schools wanted to feel inclusive, but were actually stressing and emphasizing understandings of behavior that they saw as respectable and as more associated with the middle classes. And I think she teased that out in a very rich way, using qualitative data.
Thank you. And you also mentioned alongside the issues of social class to do with ethnicity. So was there quite a distinct, something distinct about the ethnic mix in each of the schools?
Well, in my case studies, it wasn't very evident, because I didn't choose the cases considering that criteria. But in fact, in Chile, we have increasing numbers of migration, and it's becoming an issue of interest for researchers, policymakers, and practitioners, because it's not very evident how to sort out the difficulties associated to this diversity, specifically because there's an increasing proportion of students coming from Haiti, and they don't speak Spanish. So there's several challenges associated to that. Also, we have a high number of indigenous people in Chile, and this is a topic which is not very well addressed by our educational system. We still have a lot to learn about how to create more inclusive education in that sense, not only for indigenous people, but also for those who don't identify as indigenous, but who currently know nothing about the lives of indigenous people in Chile. So there's a lot to learn in that respect as well.
Thank you. And you also mentioned right at the start, some of your research looks at to do with parenting, the parental choices that they make. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
My master's thesis in sociology, it was about school choice in Chile, and particularly the parents' attitudes towards social diversity in schools. So how they considered or not the social composition of the schools in their choices. And what I found was that most of the parents were very influenced by the social composition of the school. So, for example, they tended to consider this element even more than the academic results of the school. So they were looking actively for schools that had students and families that they consider valuable, or at least not risky. And that was very evident, for example, in the case of the parents of working class parents, because they wanted to guarantee a social environment that would allow them to continue higher education. So they were very worried about avoiding certain practices that could deviate them from this project. For example, consuming drugs or getting pregnant very young, and so on. In the case of the parents from a higher socioeconomic background, there's still a lot of anxiety here in Chile. These private elite schools that I was mentioning before, they tend to be very selective, and parents tend to be very anxious about not getting their children there, about not being able to guarantee that the children have social relationships with people who are very close to their environment. So friends, families, people that they consider to be valuable.
Thank you. That was actually going to be my next question about selection. So how does it work for the school system? How do they select for the private schools? And then how does a child get there? You know, if they've selected obviously an ambitious school, what determines whether they get in or not?
Well, that's actually a very interesting question, because what we know it because of informal conversations, research, but the Ministry of Education doesn't regulate what these private schools can do in their admission processes. So we know that they use, for example, interviews with parents and students, and they also do tests. They also analyze their interactions. So they use these playgroup sessions to figure out, with children who are all applicants. So they kind of compare their social attitudes. Some parents even start to train their children to this situation in advance. They for example, start to ask them questions that they assume they could be asked in the interviews. It's very, very competitive.
I see. And then what sort of fees are we talking for those top schools? Are they way out the reach for the vast majority of people?
Oh yes, definitely. It's as I said, is not regulated, so we don't know exactly. So, but there's some information circulating on the media. I would say it's very common to have fees around 500, 600 pounds a month. Mm. And that's not particularly expensive. You could find some even more expensive fees.
And I'm guessing, based on what you said earlier, that is translating into who continues into further and higher education, and ultimately who's going into the higher position jobs within the country as well.
Yes, well, in Chile, higher education is not free, so everybody has to pay for it. Now we are going through some reforms in that respect as well, but at the moment it's not free for everybody. So you can access higher education institutions depending on your academic results in the test for accessing universities, and depending on your resources, economic resources. So the most prestigious universities are the ones that ask for higher academic results. Maybe they are not the most expensive, but it's very common that those who studied in state schools can't access these prestigious universities. Mm. And it's very common that these students who come from a poor background need to go to private higher education institutions that charge very high fees and that don't have a high status. So then looking for jobs is quite difficult.
Yeah. Carol, from your point of view, it sounds like we're looking at a different country to the UK, same issues. It sounds like the same story we're hearing from a range of different countries again and again.
There are parallels, but the actual details are obviously affected by the social, political, historical, economic and cultural context of different nation states. But yes, you can see certainly in terms of parallels, in terms of the broad story around inequalities around class and race.
One of the other things that I did want to ask, I spoke to Diane Ray, who wrote the book Miseducation, who's very much in favour of the abolition of private schools. She says the only way we'll ever get to the bottom of this inequality is that we have a one-class education system for all, no sort of fee-paying schools. I wonder where you stood on that argument.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would very much agree with Diane there. Although, as you yourself said earlier, Matthew, then even if we have a completely comprehensive system and no private sector, there will still be inequalities in terms of schools, because schools reflect residential segregation and wider social inequalities. But yes, I would personally believe that getting rid of the private sector would be enormously beneficial in helping us level the playing field. And you can see from Social Mobility Commission reports from across a number of years the way in which jobs in particularly prestigious professions in medicine, in law, journalism are dominated by privately educated children.
Yeah, I agree totally. We've had this discussion in Chile as well. Well, we have a new government since March. And one of the priorities of this government is to reinforce state education. So because it's very difficult to put this topic of having only one system of education now, so this is an intermediate solution. okay, we're not going to eliminate private education, but we need to reinforce public education.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much for your time today. I always give an opportunity for people at the end to give out some details if people want to find out more about your work or perhaps add you on Twitter. Do you want to give out some details at all?
Yes, well, I wanted to speak about the special issue that we edited with 3 colleagues, Denise Sepúlveda, Francisca Ortiz, and Sara Joico. This special issue is entitled Education and the Production of Inequalities, Dialogues from the Global South and the Global North. It was recently published in the Journal of Sociology in early August, so you can find it there in the webpage of the journal. And yes, this special edition is exactly about the topic that we were speaking about the role of education in the reproduction of social inequalities, but also about the potentialities to challenge such inequalities. And also we acknowledge the criticism regarding the lower visibility of sociological studies from the global south compared to those from the global north. So this special edition aimed at serving as a forum for cross-cultural consideration of how education affects contemporary social issues. We have 8 papers. One of them is written by Carol Vincent. We have a variety of countries here: Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, China, Italy, England. And we invited authors at different stages of their careers. We paid special attention to inviting emerging researchers to contribute to give visibility to the work, and also acknowledging gender inequity in academia. We paid special attention to the inclusion of women researchers, ideally as first authors. Also, the special edition covers a diversity of quantitative and qualitative methodologies, a diversity of topics related to processes of inclusion and exclusion at schools and universities. So yeah, I really invite you all to look for the papers. They are, most of them are open access. And we really think that this publication will be of interest to sociology students, researchers, practitioners, and policymakers who want to have a deeper understanding of how the education can reproduce, but also challenge and transform social inequalities.
Can I just add, I think it's very important to have a journal issue excuse me, that focuses on the global south, because I edit another different journal, and I'm aware, as a lot of managing editors for journals would be, that it's very difficult for voices from the global south, researchers from the global south, to become published in some of the prestigious journals that operate out of England or Australia or the United States or Canada. So it's extremely important to have a space like this in which we can hear the voices and perspectives of those who are researching in what we broadly define as the global south.
Thank you. Very much agreed as well. And what I can do when the episode goes out, I can add the links to the little bio thing so people can follow the links. And also, if you're happy for me to give out your Twitter details as well, so people can add you on that as well.
That would be great. Thank you, Matthew.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and good luck with all future research as well.
Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate it, because we can reach a wider audience than the one that we usually reach through papers.
No problem. Thank you very much again. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.